Hello lovers, welcome back to another For the Marriage video. I am Laco Hanson, a marriage coach just out here trying to help bring the divorce rate DOWN. If this is your first time to this channel here, one, welcome. Two, make sure you find that subscribe button below and click it. Our mission at For the Marriage is to provide positive content, services, and products that help marriages reconnect, thrive, and build fulfilling marriages worth having. Okay, so if that is something that you are looking for in a community, just make sure you go ahead and subscribe below. Three, thank you so much for joining me in this video. For my old lovers, you know it's always a pleasure to have you come on back to me. So thank you so much for joining me in this video as well. I got a good topic for us today, so let's go ahead and dig right into it, okay? So I wanted to do this conversation, or I wanted to do this topic about poor communication. Now, I know there's so many videos out there on how to better your communication, why communication is so important in relationships, all relationships. You know, we've all heard communication is key. I've probably said it multiple times on this channel here as well. And in fact, it is important, right? But I want us to make sure we're giving our marriage grace and understanding that communication is not always going to be on the high. No matter how much you practice or how much you invest into communication, your communication is going to ebb and flow like marriage, because we are human, right? And we have different emotions through different seasons. You know, our moods are going to change with the weather. And what does that do for us, right? In our communication. Our communication is affected by our mood, which you probably already knew, right? So I'll use me for an example. If I have a little attitude, right? I'm going to have attitude in my communication skills, right? And I like to say, like, I'm going to tell you exactly how I feel, point blank, period, okay? But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a really good communicator. Just because I'm telling you how I feel, I have to think about my tone, right? I have to think about my neck rolls, my eye rolls. I have to do all these things. How am I delivering it to you where you are going to receive it? Or am I just telling you how I feel because that's where I am at, right? So we need to make sure we're giving our marriage and our relationship grace when it comes to communicating, because even if you may be right here, you have to understand where your spouse may be on the communication, right? They may not have a good day. So even though you're all happy and chipper and you want them to come up to you, they probably don't have that energy to come up to you. So then again, it's going to have some issues because you're happy and they're not on your level and they're being a Debbie Downer and stuff like that. So then your communication is going to be affected by that. It's just important for us to understand that yes, communication is key. Communication is important, but also too, communication is very, like, what do they call it? Finicky. Like, it's not going to be always stable, right? And it's very important for you to understand that when you and your spouse are not communicating on the same page, right? So we hear why communication is important. We understand that communication is key. But do we really know where poor communication stems from? And I've done some research. I think that is very important for me to discuss communication this month. So this month of October is going to be communication heavy. Let's talk about communication. How can we better our communication? What are some things to look into when we're talking about communication? How can we help our marriage when it comes to communication? But I wanted to start off on, where does communication stem from? So I was going to tell you all this story that started back in the 1700s and how people struggled with communicating and why we are affected by poor communication today. But I thought it was a little bit corny because it just was something that I was reading online about, you know, how life was back in the 1700s, how, you know, it was a very hard life. You know, they were packed inside of houses. They didn't have some of the, or majority of the amenities that we have in today's life, but that was across the board, right? So there was really no room to complain or argue or, like, you know, talk about our feelings, because at the end of the day, everybody that we knew were going, or everybody that they knew were going through the same struggles in the 1700s. So when you think about how that trickled down into, you know, our families and how communication, you know, affects us, it kind of stems back from the 1700s, right? Where they didn't complain, or they didn't talk about their feelings, or they didn't really express their feelings. And then now we're married and we're going through the same thing where we're not communicating and we're not expressing our feelings. So I made that story up, but some of the facts in there are real. Like, you know, it was very hard. They don't have the amenities that we have. But at the end of the day, poor communication stems from a number of things, right? And I'm just going to go over 3 of what I find to be true, right, in marriages and relationships, and why it's important to give your marriage grace in this realm of communication. Okay, so number 1 is poor communication stems from a lack of having to express oneself as a child. Now, some children are able to express themselves. Their parents work on them day in and day out. We're in that stage right now with our children, and by all means, we are not perfect, but our 3-year-olds, like, they're in this whining phase where, you know, everything that if they want something, they want to whine. If they don't get what they want to whine. And we're really trying to pull it out of them to, like, why are you whining? Okay, tell us, use your words, speak, tell me how you're feeling. So that's where we are in the parenting realm, right? And I think this is a very important stage to be able to, you know, go through with our children, because it's going to set them up for success in relationships and in their marriage and things like that, right? So when you are not able to express how you're feeling, it makes it more difficult as you go through life when you're trying to, you know, express yourself and you just don't know how, because you never were taught, right? And to me, I think that expressing your feelings is something that you grow into, right? You have to grow into, you have to have, you know, a taste of it, and then be like, okay, this is how I'm supposed to express myself. And although, like, someone like me, where I'm just like, I'm going to tell you how I feel no matter what, like, I don't know really where that comes from, but at the same time, it's still not just the best way to communicate either. But I know how to express myself. I know how to say, this is how I'm feeling and this is why, right? Now, the person on the other end have to be able to receive it. And again, that may not be something that they were taught or understand how to do. And I'm going to say this, I know we already know that this is true. Women are more emotional, and we tend to know how to express ourselves a little bit more, where men are more just like, you know, it is what it is. I don't really have to say what I don't have to say. It is what, you know, it's going to be what it's going to be. They're more like detached from communicating about their feelings, right? So one thing that we have to understand is that even though we're presenting, hey, we have poor communication, our spouse doesn't really probably know how to meet us where our communication level is. And it's okay, but it's something that we have to continue to work on, and we have to continue to nurture in our marriage to make them, number 2, you know, have a comfortable space to be able to, you know, express and communicate their feelings. So number 2 is going to be, they probably don't feel comfortable with being vulnerable, right? So obviously, if they, as children, did not, and I'm not just talking about men, because there are some women out there too that don't really know how to express themselves. And probably, I mean, outside of research, probably more women than men don't know how to express themselves. So again, we will say 50-50, right? But if you don't allow your spouse to feel comfortable with being vulnerable, then that too is going to affect the way that you all communicate and how, you know, they receive the communication from you and you receive it from them. So when we are in those heated moments, or we want to discuss something with our spouse, and we're not getting, you know, any feedback, or they're easily cutting the conversation short or whatever the case may be, we have to start looking into these two things. Like, where is this stemming from, right? Do they really know how to express themselves? And then also too, am I providing a vulnerable spot for them, right? Am I providing them to be comfortable in this vulnerable spot? And if those, when you take a step back and you probably not in the moment, like realizing like, okay, maybe my spouse doesn't know how to express themselves, or maybe my spouse, doesn't feel comfortable. In the moment, you probably aren't thinking that. But when you take your step back or take a step back, you may start to assess like, okay, my spouse is not really, grabbing or able to, articulate how they're feeling. So you want to just look at those two things. And I honestly think those are the biggest things, right? One, they were not brought up on how to express or communicate their feelings. And then two, they don't feel comfortable with being vulnerable. I think those two are probably some of the most important things to understand when you're going into a marriage. And we can talk about like, maybe having to ask these questions and get the answers up front. Like, how comfortable are you with expressing yourself or being vulnerable or, communicating? Like how well do you do that, right? Because we get into a relationship and it like, we're not asking these questions. Like, heck, I didn't even ask these questions. Like, like we're just like, oh, somebody cares about me, somebody loves me, like, let's get into it, right? But these are questions that we have to ask our spouses, like, how do you feel with expressing your feelings, right? And you could probably get the answer right away, depending on how they answer that. Well, it doesn't really matter to me, or, I don't really know. You could really get that from your spouse if you just ask the right questions. So it's very important to understand those two. Now, this third one, I kind of contemplated on if I wanted to add it into this video or not, because I still always want to keep a positive feel to everything. But in some cases, I think it's just a pride thing, right? So number 3 is going to be, it's just a pride thing. Like, being able to communicate or express ourselves is letting people in, right? And even though you're my spouse, why would I really let you in if, I'm feeling attacked, or if I'm feeling, not valued or anything like that? It's kind of like a pride thing where it's just like, no, I'm good. I ain't got nothing to say, And we have all had those conversations where it's like, let's have a conversation, right? And we're talking and we're expressing how we feel. And then our significant other, our spouse, shuts down. You have to really reflect and say, well, did I say something wrong? Or, what happened? Maybe they've gotten defensive, and maybe their pride has gotten in the way. Maybe their ego wasn't stroked the right way. So you just want to remember these things when you are communicating or your communication is lacking with your spouse. Like, what is the setting, right? Where are we? How are we feeling? You know what I mean? Because what is my tone, right? Like, how am I presenting myself? Am I just going on and on and on and on and on, and they're just like, okay, whatever, it don't matter? Or, am I expecting them to be at my communication level when they really never had the opportunity to grow in communication? So it's all about learning together. It's all about working together. It's all about talking to each other to create a safe space for each other. And maybe sometimes it's more about, you just listening to them and allowing them to express themselves, regardless if you got to bite your tongue, right? Or your lip, like, just let them express themselves so that way they can be a little bit more comfortable and open up and be more vulnerable. So I want to rehash this again. Poor communication could potentially stem from these 3 things, okay? not being able to express themselves in childhood, not feeling comfortable with being vulnerable with you, and then 3, their pride. So, hopefully this video helped someone out there, help someone understand why there are some different, communication skills, why communication is poor in their marriage. And hopefully it allows you to look at communication in your marriage in a different light. If you have any questions whatsoever, there's a few ways that you can reach out to me. You can DM me, or you can email me. My email is in the description box below. Or we can have a conversation in the comments. I would love to see how you all are feeling about this. What are some ways that you think that, or what are some reasons why you think communication is poor in marriages? Until next time, let's do marriage right. Bye-bye.